Bloodlines dictate everything in the Lycan courts, but secrets destroy them. When the Supreme Alpha King claimed a stunning, cunning bride, he thought he secured his pack's legacy. He never suspected his true mate, the sister he cast aside, was running into the frozen wilderness, carrying his only living heir. Shadows clung to the stone walls of Winterbourne Castle, but in the secluded alcove of the royal gardens, the air was thick with the intoxicating scent of rain and crushed pine. Gwyneth rested her head against Sean's chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of the Alpha King's heart. His hands, rough from years of battle, were surprisingly gentle as they stroked her raven hair. For 3 months, they had met in the dark. For 3 months, the King of the Western Reaches had whispered promises against her skin, swearing that the ancient laws of their kind would not keep them apart. "Tomorrow is the choosing," Sean murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "When I stand before the elders, I will bypass the highborn ladies. I will hand the Luna's circlet to you, Gwyneth. I care nothing for your mother's common blood. The moon goddess chose you for me, and I choose you before the pack." Gwyneth closed her eyes, letting a tear of pure relief slip down her cheek. She was a daughter of the late Duke of Ethelgard, but her mother had been a mere servant. In the ruthless hierarchy of the Lycan nobility, Gwyneth was a ghost, a half-breed tolerated only because of her father's past glory. Her older half-sister, Arabella, was the true jewel of the family, pure-blooded, radiant, and fiercely ambitious. Arabella had spent her entire life preparing to rule beside the king. Gwyneth had only ever wanted Sean, the man beneath the crown. "They will riot, Sean," she whispered, pulling back to look into his striking, storm-grey eyes. "The elders will say I am unfit to be Luna. Arabella's supporters will challenge your authority." "Let them," Sean growled, his wolf surging beneath his skin, his eyes flashing with sudden gold. "I am the Alpha King. My word is absolute law." The next evening, the great hall of Winterbourne was a sea of velvet, fur, and polished steel. Hundreds of pack members gathered beneath the soaring timber ceilings, the air thick with tension and the primal scent of expectant wolves. Gwyneth stood near the back, dressed in a simple, deep crimson gown, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Across the hall, standing on the raised dais, was Arabella. She wore a dress of spun silver, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of light. She looked every inch a queen. The heavy oak doors groaned open, and Sean entered. He was clad in ceremonial black leather and wolf fur, his presence commanding absolute silence. The sheer aura of his power forced the weaker wolves to bare their necks in submission. Gwyneth's breath hitched. He was magnificent. As he walked down the central aisle, holding the intricate silver circlet of the Luna, his eyes scanned the crowd. For a fleeting second, his gaze locked onto Gwyneth. She saw the flash of recognition, the familiar heat. But then, she saw something else. A shadow of hesitation. A flicker of political calculation. The High Elder, standing near the royal seat, gave Sean a single, sharp nod, gesturing toward the gathered lords, whose armies Sean desperately needed to secure the northern borders. Sean tore his eyes away from Gwyneth. He kept walking. Gwyneth's blood ran cold. The world seemed to slow down as Sean ascended the dais. He did not turn back. He stopped directly in front of Arabella. The golden-haired beauty sank into a graceful curtsy, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Arabella of Ethelgard," Sean's voice boomed across the silent hall, devoid of the warmth he had shown in the gardens. "I choose you as my Luna, to rule by my side, to bind our bloodlines, and to lead the western reaches into a new age. He placed the circlet on Arabella's head. The hall erupted into deafening howls of approval and applause. Gwyneth couldn't breathe. The rejection was a physical blow, a sudden, agonizing severing of the fragile mate bond that had been forming between them. Her wolf whimpered in absolute devastation, curling up in the darkest corner of her mind. He had chosen power. He had chosen peace with the lords over his mate. Later that night, as the castle celebrated the new royal pairing, Gwyneth packed her meagre belongings into a canvas satchel. The door to her chamber creaked open, and Arabella stepped in, still wearing the silver circlet. "Going somewhere, little sister?" Arabella purred, closing the door behind her. The scent of Sean was all over her, a cloying, heavy musk that made Gwyneth sick to her stomach. "You have what you want, Arabella." "Let me leave in peace," Gwyneth said, not looking up. Arabella let out a soft, cruel laugh. "Oh, I will let you leave. In fact, I insist upon it. Did you really think I didn't know about your pathetic little midnight strolls in the garden? Did you think a king would actually marry a bastard?" Arabella stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "He told me everything, Gwyneth. He said you were a pleasant distraction. Nothing more. A way to pass the time before he took a true wife. If I ever see your face in this territory again, I will have the guards tear you to pieces." Gwyneth didn't argue. She slung the satchel over her shoulder and walked out into the freezing night. It wasn't until a week later, hiding in a filthy tavern on the outskirts of the kingdom, that the true horror of her situation dawned on her. The nausea that hit her every morning was not just grief. Her heightened lichen senses detected the subtle, undeniable shift in her own scent. Beneath the smell of road dust and despair, there was a new fragrance, wild rain and crushed pine. She was carrying the Alpha King's child. Panic seized her. If Sean found out, he might take the child and kill her. If Arabella found out, she would slaughter them both without hesitation to protect her own future offspring's claim to the kingdom. Gwyneth had to disappear entirely. She could not just leave the territory, she had to leave the known world. The crossing of the jagged peaks took 3 weeks. Gwyneth survived on frozen roots, melted snow, and sheer, stubborn willpower. Her wolf was weak, starved of the mate bond, but the tiny, flickering spark of life in her womb kept her moving forward. She lost 2 toes to frostbite and was nearly torn apart by a mountain lion. But she finally stumbled down the western slopes into the territory of the Blackwood pack. The Blackwoods were ancient rivals of Sean's kingdom. They were a brutal, insular pack that lived deep within the shadowed forests, ruled by Alpha Gideon, a massive, scarred warrior who had no love for the Alpha King. Gwyneth was found collapsed by a frozen river by Blackwood border patrols. They dragged her half-dead body to Gideon's great hall. When she awoke, surrounded by hostile, growling wolves, Gideon sat before her, his massive hands resting on the pommel of a broadsword. "You bear the scent of the western reaches, stray," Gideon rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "And you smell of royalty. Who are you running from?" "No one of consequence," Gwyneth lied smoothly, though her body trembled. "I am a bastard daughter of Ethelgard. My pack was destroyed by rogues, and I was taken. I managed to escape, but I am with child, a rogue's child." She lowered her head, exposing her neck in ultimate submission. "I ask for sanctuary, Alpha Gideon. I will scrub your floors. I will tend your fires. I will be nothing but a shadow. Please." Gideon studied her for a long, terrifying moment. He was a ruthless man, but he respected survival. The fact that a pregnant female had crossed the jagged peaks alone in the dead of winter spoke of a strength he admired. "You will earn your keep, Shadow," Gideon finally decreed, "and if your pup causes trouble, I will drown it in the river myself." 7 months later, in a drafty, straw-filled shed behind the pack's kitchens, Gwyneth gave birth. It was an agonizing, silent labor, for she dared not draw attention to herself. When the cries of a newborn finally pierced the gloom, the pack midwife handed the swaddled bundle to Gwyneth. "A boy," the old woman grunted. "Unusually large. He has a strong wolf in him." Gwyneth looked down at her son. He had a mop of dark, raven hair like hers, but when he opened his eyes, Gwyneth's breath caught in her throat. They were not the amber or brown of common wolves. They were a striking, luminescent storm grey, the exact eyes of Alpha King Sean. She named him Leo. 5 years passed. Life in the Blackwood pack was grueling, but Gwyneth found a rhythm. She worked tirelessly in the kitchens, keeping her head down and her face hidden beneath ash and dirt. Leo, however, was impossible to hide. By his 5th winter, Leo was the size of an 8-year-old. He was faster, stronger, and far more aggressive than the other pups. His wolf spirit was so dense and powerful that grown warriors felt a strange compulsion to bare their necks when the child threw a tantrum. Gwyneth had to constantly scold him, begging him to hide his strength, terrified that Gideon would recognize the royal blood coursing through the boy's veins. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in Winterbourne, a heavy, suffocating rot had settled over the western reaches. Sean sat in his grand hall, staring blankly into the roaring hearth. His kingdom was prosperous, his borders secure, but his soul was a barren wasteland. The moon goddess, it seemed, did not forgive those who broke the sacred mate bond for political gain. The consequences of his choice had manifested in the cruelest way possible. Arabella was barren. For 5 years they had tried to produce an heir. The finest healers and witches had been brought to the castle, but all gave the same grim diagnosis. The Luna's womb was a stone. The pack, sensing the break in the natural order, was growing restless. Crops failed. The birth rate among the common wolves plummeted. Whispers of a curse spread like wildfire through the villages. Arabella had grown paranoid and vicious, ruling the pack with an iron fist to compensate for her failure. She executed servants for the slightest perceived insults and surrounded herself with sycophants. Sean had grown to loathe her. He loathed her voice, her scent, and her constant, desperate demands for affection. Every night, Sean's wolf howled in the depths of his mind, crying out for the mate he had discarded. He remembered the smell of rain and pine in the garden. He remembered the way Gwyneth's eyes lit up when she smiled. He had secretly sent his most trusted trackers to find her 2 years ago, intending to bring her back, to beg for her forgiveness, even if he had to strip Arabella of the Luna title to do it. But the trackers found nothing. Gwyneth had vanished off the face of the earth. Most assumed she had perished in the winter storms. "My king," a voice interrupted his dark reverie. It was his beta, a scarred warrior named Kalen. A message from the Blackwood territory. "Alpha Gideon has agreed to the border summit. He expects you at his fortress before the next full moon." Sean sighed, rubbing his temples. The Blackwood pack had been raiding their northwestern borders, stealing cattle and killing patrols. Sean needed to negotiate a treaty, or there would be an all-out war. "Prepare the royal guard," Sean commanded, his voice dead and hollow. "We ride for Blackwood tomorrow. I will deal with Gideon myself." As the royal procession marched toward the dense, shadowed forests of the Blackwood territory, Sean had no idea he was riding directly toward the ghost of his past. and in the muddy courtyard of the Blackwood kitchens, a 5-year-old boy with startling grey eyes snapped a solid oak broom handle in half with his bare hands, completely unaware that his father, the Alpha King, was coming for him. Rain lashed relentlessly against the ancient stone walls of the Blackwood fortress as Alpha King Sean rode through the massive iron gates. His royal entourage, clad in heavy furs and silver armor, looked completely out of place in the grim, mud-soaked courtyard. Sean dismounted, his boots sinking into the muck. He felt a strange, inexplicable tightness in his chest. His wolf, usually dormant and brooding, was suddenly pacing wildly within his mind, scratching at the edges of his consciousness. It was a phantom sensation, a ghost of a feeling he hadn't experienced in 5 long years. Inside the sweltering, smoke-filled kitchens, Gwyneth scrubbed violently at a cast-iron cauldron. Beatrice, the head cook, and the closest thing Gwyneth had to a friend in this wretched place, hurried over, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. "The King of the West is in the Great Hall, girl," Beatrice hissed, her voice barely audible over the roaring hearth. "They say he's in a foul mood. Keep your head down, and for the goddess's sake, keep that wild boy of yours hidden in the root cellar until they ride out." Gwyneth's blood turned to ice. Sean was here, the man who had broken her soul, the father of the child she had spent 5 years desperately hiding. Panic seized her throat. "Where is Leo?" she demanded, dropping her scrubbing brush. "I put him in the cellar an hour ago," Beatrice assured her. But a sudden, terrifying crash from the courtyard outside shattered the cook's confidence. In the courtyard, Sean was walking toward the Great Hall, flanked by his royal guard and a scribe named Harrison, a man known to be fiercely loyal to Arabella's family. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen storehouse burst open. A 5-year-old boy, covered in soot and wearing oversized ragged tunics, tumbled out into the rain. He was chasing a stray dog, his small face set in a look of fierce, predatory determination. Arthur, the captain of Sean's guard, stepped forward, scowling at the filthy child. "Out of the way, street rat!" the knight barked, shoving the boy back with a heavily gauntleted hand. It was a fatal miscalculation. Leo did not cry. He did not cower. A low, terrifying growl erupted from the child's throat, a sound far too deep and resonant for a 5-year-old. Before Arthur could react, Leo's hands clamped onto the knight's forearm. With a surge of supernatural strength that defied logic, the tiny boy twisted and hurled the 200-pound armored guard over his shoulder. Arthur slammed into the muddy cobblestones with a deafening crash, his breastplate dented, gasping for air. The entire courtyard froze. The royal guards drew their swords in sheer reflex. Sean stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, his storm-grey eyes locking onto the feral child standing in the pouring rain. The boy was breathing heavily, his small fists clenched, entirely unafraid of the drawn steel surrounding him. But it wasn't the boy's strength that made Sean's heart stop. It was the boy's eyes, luminescent, storm-grey eyes, exact mirrors of his own. "Hold your blades!" Sean roared, the alpha command echoing off the stone walls, forcing the guards to instantly sheathe their weapons and bare their necks. Sean took a slow, trembling step forward. The strange tightness in his chest snapped, blooming into a blinding, agonizing realization. He looked at the boy's raven hair, the shape of his jaw, the sheer, undeniable density of the alpha aura radiating from his tiny frame. "Whose pup is this?" Sean whispered, the air turning heavy with his dominant presence. Alpha Gideon, who had emerged from the great hall to greet his royal guest, looked entirely bewildered. "He is a bastard, King Sean, belonging to a kitchen drudge who sought sanctuary here 5 years ago." Before Sean could speak, a woman burst from the kitchen doors. She was covered in ash, her clothes little more than rags, her raven hair hacked short and matted with grease. She threw herself onto the mud in front of the boy, shielding him with her body, her face pressed against the earth in total submission. "Mercy, my king," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "He is but a child. He does not know his own strength." Sean felt the breath leave his lungs, the smell of the courtyard, the wet dog, the mud, the smoke. Vanished. Beneath the grime and the filth of the woman grovelling before him, a scent hit him with the force of a physical blow. Wild rain, crushed pine. The severed mate bond, dormant for half a decade, ignited like a powder keg. Sean fell to his knees in the mud, uncaring of his velvet cloak, uncaring of the hundreds of eyes watching him. He reached out with a trembling, scarred hand, gently grasping the woman's chin and tilting her face upward. Tears cut clean tracks through the soot on Gwyneth's cheeks. She looked at him with a mixture of terror and profound, exhausting sorrow. "Gwyneth," Sean choked out, a tear spilling over his own lashes. He looked from her to the boy, the math doing itself in a fraction of a second. 5 years. The exact time since he had chosen Arabella. He is mine." A collective gasp rippled through the royal guards. In the shadows of the courtyard, Harrison, Arabella's loyal scribe, went completely still. His mind raced. Arabella was barren. The kingdom was failing. If this bastard child lived, Arabella's reign, and the immense wealth her family had siphoned from the crown, was over. Harrison silently slipped a poison-laced silver dagger from his sleeve, stepping out of the peripheral vision of the guards. "You have no right to him," Gwyneth hissed, trying to pull her chin from Sean's grasp. The fear was gone, replaced by the fierce, maternal rage of a cornered wolf. "You made your choice, Sean. You chose your crown. You chose her." "I chose death," Sean murmured brokenly, the mighty Alpha King looking utterly defeated. "My kingdom is rotting, Gwyneth. The goddess cursed Arabella's womb because I broke our sacred bond. I have searched for you. I have bled for you every night since you left." "Lies!" Gwyneth spat, pulling Leo closer to her chest. "Arabella told me everything. You called me a pleasant distraction, a bastard not fit for a crown." Sean's eyes widened in genuine horror. "I never said those words. I swear it on my wolf. I never spoke a word against you. She lied to you, Gwyneth. She lied to force you out." Before Gwyneth could process the revelation, a blur of motion caught her eye. Harrison lunged from the crowd, his silver blade aimed directly at Leo's back. He intended to end the threat to Arabella's throne right here in the mud. "Die, bastard!" Harrison screamed. But Sean was an Alpha King for a reason. His reflexes were supernatural. He didn't even shift into his wolf form. Sean spun on his knees, his hand shooting out to intercept Harrison's wrist. There was a sickening crack as Sean shattered the assassin's arm. Harrison dropped the poisoned blade with a shriek of agony. Sean stood up, his eyes glowing a vibrant, lethal gold. He hoisted Harrison into the air by his throat, his claws extending from his fingertips and piercing the traitor's flesh. "Who sent you?" Sean growled, his voice vibrating with demonic power. The Luna," Harrison choked out, his face turning purple. "To protect her claim." Sean didn't say another word. With a brutal twist, he snapped Harrison's neck and tossed the lifeless body into the mud. He turned to Alpha Gideon, who was watching the scene with wide, calculating eyes. "The treaty is signed, Gideon," Sean roared, his authority absolute. "But I am leaving, and I am taking my mate and my heir with me." Gideon, realizing the political shift, smartly bowed his head. "Safe travels, King Sean." The journey back to Winterbourne was swift and tense. Gwyneth refused all the luxuries Sean offered. She rode a simple horse, keeping Leo close, refusing to sleep in the royal pavilion. Sean did not push her. He spent the entire journey riding beside her, proving his devotion not with words, but with a quiet, unyielding presence. When the royal procession finally reached the towering gates of Winterbourne Castle, the news had already spread. The great hall was packed with anxious nobles, whispering furiously. Elder Jonathan, the oldest and most respected member of the council, stood near the throne. Arabella sat upon the royal dais, wearing her silver circlet and a gown of deepest black. She looked furious, her golden beauty twisted by desperation. As the massive oak doors swung open, Sean strode in. But he did not walk alone. He held Gwyneth's hand, leading her and the small, stormy-eyed boy down the central aisle. "Treason!" Arabella shrieked, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at Gwyneth. "Guards, arrest that whore and her bastard! They are impostors!" None of the guards moved. They had seen Sean's wrath at Blackwood. They had seen the boy's eyes. Sean ascended the dais, ignoring Arabella completely. He turned to Elder Jonathan and the gathered nobility. "For 5 years our lands have suffered." Sean's voice echoed like thunder. "Our crops have failed. Our numbers have dwindled. We believed it was a curse. We were right." He turned to look at Arabella, his gaze filled with pure disgust. "The goddess punishes those who break the sacred mate bond. Arabella of Ethelgard lied, manipulated, and attempted to murder my true heir to secure her power." "Lies!" Arabella screamed, though her face was pale with terror. "I present to you," Sean continued, raising Leo's small hand into the air. The boy stood tall, his storm-grey eyes scanning the crowd with an ancient, inherent authority. "Leo, my son, and the true heir to the Western Reaches, and beside him, Gwyneth, my true mate, and your rightful Luna." The great hall fell into a stunned silence. Then, slowly, Elder Jonathan stepped forward. He looked at Leo, then at Sean, and finally at Arabella. Without a word, the elder walked up to Arabella, reached out, and pulled the silver circlet from her head. Arabella collapsed to her knees, sobbing in total defeat. The power, the wealth, the status she had stolen, it was all gone in an instant. "Arabella of Ethelgard," Sean delivered his judgment, his voice cold as ice. "You are stripped of your titles. You are banished to the jagged peaks. If you ever set foot in my territory again, you will be hunted down and killed." As guards dragged the screaming Arabella from the hall, Sean turned to Gwyneth. He took the silver circlet from Elder Jonathan and dropped to one knee before the woman he had wronged. "I do not ask for your forgiveness today, Gwyneth," Sean said softly, tears pooling in his eyes once more. "I know I haven't earned it. But I vow to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you. Rule with me, not as a shadow, but as the light this kingdom needs." Gwyneth looked down at the man who had broken her heart, and then at the son who had mended it. The anger that had sustained her for 5 years slowly began to melt away, replaced by the deep, undeniable pull of the mate bond. She reached out, taking the circlet from his hands, and placed it upon her own head. The kingdom of Winterbourne healed under the reign of Luna Gwyneth and Alpha Sean. The barren lands bloomed with life, the curse lifted by the restoration of the true bloodline. Arabella became a forgotten ghost in the jagged peaks. Though Sean wore the crown, it was Gwyneth's resilience and Leo's undeniable strength that finally guided the Western Reaches into a new golden era of absolute peace, justice, and enduring legacy.